Good morning and welcome to episode 33 of the Political Mike podcast. I want to extend my appreciation and thanks for Congressman Jim Clyburn for making time to be here this morning. It's such an honor. Congressman Clyburn, thank you for being here. And go ahead. I'm going to go ahead.
For having me.
Thank you for being here. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce you a little bit. Congressman James E. Clyburn is the Majority Whip and the third ranking Democrat in the United States House of Representatives. He previously served in the post from 2007 to 2011 and served as Assistant Democratic Leader from 2011 to 2019. When he came to Congress in 1993 to represent South Carolina's 6th Congressional District, Congressman Clyburn was elected co-president of his freshman class and quickly rose through leadership ranks. He was subsequently elected chairman of the Congressional Black Caucus, vice chair, and later chair of the House Democratic Caucus. As a national leader, he has championed rural and economic development, and many of his initiatives have become law. His 10 to 20 to 30 federal funding formula was included in 4 sections of the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. Congressman Clyburn is also a passionate supporter of historic preservation and restoration programs. His efforts have restored scores of historic buildings and sites on the campuses of historically Black colleges and universities. His legislation created the South Carolina National Heritage Corridor and the Gullah Geechee Cultural Heritage Corridor, elevated the Conkery National Monument to a national park, and established the Reconstruction-era National Monument in South Carolina's Low Country. Congressman Clyburn's humble beginnings in Sumter, South Carolina, as the eldest son of an activist, fundamentalist minister, and an independent, civic-minded beautician, grounded him securely in family, faith, and public service. His memoir, Blessed Experiences, Genuinely Southern, Proudly Black, was published in 2015, and has been described as a premier that should be read by every student interested in pursuing a career in public service. I mean, he's also well known for having a famous fish fry during presidential election cycles. Congressman Clyburn, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you for having me.
I want to go ahead and open up the conversation about, pertaining to COVID relief. The House passed its $1.9 trillion coronavirus relief effort this past Saturday, and this massive proposal was sent to the Senate as Democrats rushed to approve more aid before unemployment benefits expire. It's the first major legislative initiative for President Joe Biden. The House approved it in a 219-212 party line split vote, as 2 Democrats joined all Republicans in opposing it. Senate Minority Leader now, Mitch McConnell, recently said that this bill should have been negotiated in a bipartisan manner, like the 5 previous bills before it. But he said instead the new administration has made a conscious decision to jam us, to do it one party only, and to take advantage of the reconciliation process to try to advance a whole lot of other items that are completely unrelated to COVID-19. So we're going to fight this bill every step of the way. And this echoes, the same criticism Republican senators have been giving this bill. What is your response to these criticisms? How do the proposals in the bill relate to COVID relief?
Well, I would hope that people who are paying attention to what's going on in the country today will put things in context. Now, for McConnell to say that this is being rammed through, it is not being done in a bipartisan way, is instructive, simply because if you were to read the results of all the surveys that have been made around the country, the polling, if you please, 76 to 79% of all the American people support this. That, by definition, means it's bipartisan. 76% of the American people are not Democrats. So that means that independents are supporting. The vast majority of independents support this. And the polling among Republicans only say that 56% of the Republicans support it. Now, there's one thing to have a program that is bipartisan. It is something else again to have a program that's subjected to Republican recalcitrance or the filibuster. And that's what McConnell's all about. The Republicans have a mantra, and that is compromise to them is when others come around to their way of thinking. And if we had listened to the filibusters of Strom Thurmond, there never would have been a Civil Rights Act. If we subject ourselves to the filibuster that's now going on by the Republicans, you will never get anything done for anybody but those people who reside among the upper 1 or 2% of the American people in this country. They didn't tell you, and he won't tell you, that they gave this big, almost $2 trillion tax break to the wealthiest in this country, and they did it using reconciliation to get around Democrats' objections. So what we're doing now for low to moderate income people, as well as just ordinary Americans, is exactly what they did for the rich and well-to-do in this country when they had the power.
And do you believe it's a mistake? I know that President Biden recently agreed to put a cap on, the stimulus checks that are going to be who are going to be eligible for receiving these checks. In your view, would reducing benefits, to 160,000, for example, is that too much of a concession on President Biden's part, or do you think that's necessary in order to get some tangible relief through Congress?
Well, once again, I'm a great believer in targeting the resources where they're needed. And what he did, the cap was up around, if my memory serves, $75,000. I mean, of family eligibility. $75,000 is a big number. And I'm really concerned about those people making $25,000, $35,000, $45,000. So if you're targeting the resources to the world's most in need, I don't think they ought to do a greater concession.
And Congressman Clyburn, if you could touch on, whether the House Democrats are planning to reward essential workers with some form of hazard pay, especially essential workers in the medical field, if you, can shed some light on that.
Well, I don't know. It's in the bill. What we're doing is in the bill. And I wouldn't call it a reward or award. I think that we're identifying people according to their needs, according to what's required. I'm a little bit concerned about teachers. To me, teachers are essential. And it seems to me that we have not made that clear enough in legislation that teachers ought to be right there as a priority to getting these vaccines. So I think you can go through people's worth to the overall scheme of things and determine essentiality by that.
So, Congressman, since the January runoff in Georgia, the Senate runoff took place with the victories of Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff, there has been a change, or attempted change by Georgia Republicans towards the state voting laws. For instance, on February 24th, which was last week, Georgia Republicans continued to move quickly through the state legislature, two bills, SB 241 and HB 531. SB 241 would end no excuse mail-in voting, implement new voter ID requirements, and add witness requirements for male voters. And so this would create one of the most restrictive absentee ballot voting laws in the entire country, and resulting in some of the worst voter suppression. HB 531 also rushed through, was pushed out of committee in an attempt to force legislation onto the floor before a crossover day. The bill would restrict drop box access, add new ID requirements for mail-in voting, and restrict weekend voting, among other provisions. The House recently passed the For the People Act. Because the Supreme Court is also considering an Arizona case right now pertaining to voting rights, deciding whether to uphold Arizona's 2 election restrictions. If the Supreme Court rules in the way of, the way conservatives would like it to go, are there any legislative remedies in the For the People Act to help rectify voter suppression?
Well, we have to look at things as they are. No matter what we do in the Congress, the Supreme Court determines whether or not what we've done was constitutional. Just that simple. So we can't do anything in the Congress really to make that determination. We can say that what Georgia did violate federal law. Then the Supreme Court would take a look at it and say, no, it doesn't. That's what happened with the Voting Rights Act of 1965. How long have you been operating under the Voting Rights Act of 1965? I'm sitting where I am now in the Congress because of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. The Supreme Court just made a decision in Holder, Shelby v. Holder, 8 years ago, that the 1965 Voting Rights Act is unconstitutional. That's what they said. And so we've had elections over the last 7, 8 years without the protection of the Voting Rights Act. So what Georgia is now doing, and around 30 other states, passing draconian, suppressive voting rights laws to suppress the vote, and we'll have to wait till the Supreme Court looks at it again. That's why a lot of people in the Congress are looking at H.R. 1, the bill we just passed, that you just talked about, H.R. 4, which is John R. Lewis Voting Rights Act, the Voter Empowerment Act. There are things that we've got there in the Congress that are being subjected to filibusters. And so what I would say to your listeners, look, just remember what I used to tell my students when I used to teach history. Anything that's happened before can happen again. It may look like it to a lot of people. I'm not the first Black person to serve in Congress from South Carolina. There was 7, I tell people all the time, before I was first, there were 8. So I'm the 9th. I remember at one time, the majority of the state legislature, I don't remember from being there, I remember from my studies, the majority of the state legislature here in South Carolina was Black. Now, and by the time I ran again in 1970, it was 100% white because of laws called Jim Crow laws. So we went all the way. South Carolina at one time had 4 Congress people, and 3 of them were Black. And all of a sudden, none. And for 95 years, there was none. Why? Because the Supreme Court in Plessy versus Ferguson did away with all of that. So I would tell your listeners what they're doing in Georgia. It's starting in Georgia this time, and it's spread to about 30 other states. It's the same thing that was done in South Carolina with secession, and it spread. And I'm sitting there watching all these people at the so-called CPAC last week, and I look out there, and there are 4 or 5 Black folks sitting out there, sitting among the people who are trying to take their voting rights away. Nobody gonna ask them when they walk up to the polls, were you at the CPAC convention? No. We gonna make it hard for you to vote, just like we make it hard for others to vote. Why is it that we saw last week in all of the reports coming out that these people who were planning to take over the Capitol, they want to take over the Capitol, and they want to eliminate Democrats, not everybody in Congress, but the Democrats in Congress. Now they are defining for us what this is all about. This is all about power among what we call white supremacists that identify themselves as Republicans. We didn't do that. They are doing it. So when I tell you this, people may point to what I say. I'm asking you to read the same documents that I read and see what they are saying.
And it's interesting that, even Senator Mitch McConnell and other Republican senators on the floor actually seem to make the concession that, if this bill, H.R. 1, were to get implemented by the Senate, this would unfavorably favor Democrats. And the idea being, when you open up the ballot box to more people, give people more access, that's not a good thing for their party, the GOP, which I thought was interesting as well. But, in your view, because you're a champion for civil rights, your former colleagues, Elijah Cummings and John Lewis, also great men who went down in history for their stance for civil rights. In your view, do you see any parallels to the inadequacies of legislation that we have on the books now compared to back in the civil rights era? And do you see an urgent need today, as you did back then, for serious civil rights and voting rights reform because of those gaping holes in the legislation that we currently have?
Yes, I do. It's all there. In fact, that's the playbook that they're using. If you go back and look at everything that Trump mimicked when he was president, you can see the very same thing happening after Reconstruction. One of the things that people mistakenly believe is that Reconstruction was this long period of time in history. It wasn't. Reconstruction didn't last for 12 years. Right from around ushered in around 1865. Well, let's just say 1863. The Emancipation Proclamation became effective in 1863, and these Reconstruction laws got ushered in around 1865. Reconstruction was over 1877. 1877, after the Children Hayes Compromise, that ended Reconstruction. All the troops were taken out of the South, and then we went into this period of so-called Jim Crow laws. And so when people talk about this, they would do well to really get a good understanding of what they're talking about, because we are living through that same period of time now. What developed as Jim Crow laws, excuse me, start out with a Supreme Court decision, Schuss Frank, I guess that's the way you pronounce it, against Louisiana, 1872 Supreme Court decision. A lot of people look at Plessy versus Ferguson in the 1890s, but no, it started before that. Plessy just cemented it. And we're going through the same thing now. Now, the question is, are we going to learn from that history? Or are we going to sit around and let that history repeat itself? And that's what's happening when you fail to show up to vote. That's what's happening when you fail to register. And that's what happened when you sit around and say that what they're doing ain't going to matter, just leave it up to the Lord. Well, my dad was a fundamentalist minister who told me all the time, you pray to the good Lord for good health and strength. And if he gives you some modicum of that, get up off your knees and go out and work like hell. Why do we ask ourselves to be made instruments of God's peace? If you do that, that means you want to be used to do something. So you can't sit back and say, I'm going to leave it in the hands of the Lord. You are supposed to be the hands of the Lord.
And what is your response to young people who think that the Democratic Party is just expecting the African American vote to go their direction, or the Hispanic vote, minority voters to vote for the Democratic Party because of the trend that has happened since the passage of the Voting Rights Act in the 1960s? Especially when you have, for instance, Biden in the town hall saying, look, I never promised to erase $50,000 of student loan debt. I've heard a lot of my friends, my colleagues say, well, this is an example of, the fact that we put our vote and our faith in this candidate and this party. We're getting very little in return. What is your response to those young people and the criticism they may have?
Get real. That's my response. Get real. You ought to stop that foolishness. I put in the legislation. I'm a Democrat. Elizabeth Warren is a Democrat. She put legislation in the Senate to reduce about $50,000. I put up legislation in the House to reduce about $50,000. No, Joe Biden didn't promise. So then why? I'm a Democrat. If we pass the bill, he'll sign it. That's all I'm saying. So let's get real. How did you get so much student debt? back when Barack Obama was president, we eliminated, we took all that that money from the banks. They were making $40 billion a year of student loans. Trump comes in, put it back to where it was. You got that debt because of these Republicans. So stop acting like crazy people and look at what is going on here. Obama got rid of it. Trump brought it back and you got it. I'm trying to get $50,000 reduced. Elizabeth Warren trying to get $50,000, and here you are using as an excuse because Joe Biden didn't support it. Joe Biden has one vote, but he got 80-something million votes. Joe Biden didn't turn this campaign around. It was the voters in South Carolina, Democratic voters, who's turned his campaign around because we favor his presidency. So you telling me you'd rather have the Trump presidency than the Biden presidency because he didn't support what I support? Just help me get the bill passed. He'll sign it.
So this past Wednesday, 2 days ago, the House passed the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. This was a law that was, being, it was a lot of people were anticipating this bill to come through, especially in the wake of this past summer, which saw a lot of riots and protests because of the injustice that took place with George Floyd, and not just George Floyd, but Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor and other African Americans who were the recipients of yet more injustice. So this bill would ban chokeholds and alter so-called qualified immunity for law enforcement, which would make it easier to pursue claims of police misconduct. And I know as a law student, that would mean making Section 1983 civil rights claims easier to put forward. This bill was voted on with 220 supporting and 212 voting against it, mostly along party lines again. And this comes 9 months after George Floyd was murdered. So in your view, because there was also a similar House bill passed last year, but failed to get, through the Republican-controlled Senate, what's different this time other than the dynamics at play in terms of, the Senate? Does this bill differ in any way from that previous bill? And, which senators are you looking for? Because you need 10 Republican senators in order for this bill to become law, to get passed through the Senate. Which senators are you looking for that can really be the game changers to reach across the aisle and actually get this put forward?
Well, quite frankly, I'm looking for none of them. It's like you just the previous question. I'll ask your friends who said that Democrats won't do everything they want done. Democrats just passed this bill, and Democrats have sent it to the Senate. The Senate, which did not pass the bill the last time while it was controlled by Republicans, we got a chance this time if you can get beyond the filibuster. No Democrat is going to filibuster this bill. Every Republican will. If that's not instructive to you, then I'd like to know what does it take. I would say to your friends, I got a buddy down here in South Carolina. Kay Patterson used to be a state senator. So Kay used to say a lot of time, now if that's the best thinking you can do, your mama should have sent the mule to school and kept you at home. But that's what's going on here. It's very clear. These guys are not going to pass this bill if they can filibuster it to death. They didn't pass it the last time. The House passed it. Sent it to the Senate. Mitch McConnell buried it. And he's going to try to do the same thing again. We got a shot this time if we get around the filibuster. We don't have a 50 Democratic votes. They got 50 Republican votes because the vice president can cast a vote in case of a tie, as she did yesterday to stop the Republican filibuster from reading the bill. What do you think Senator Johnson from Wisconsin is doing when he's making you read every word of the bill? It took 11 hours to read it. and that's what you want. You rather have that than Democrats to be in charge. We need to get real. That's the same thing that happened back. Remember, the success that people had after Reconstruction came because they were able to get certain black folks to help them. Robert Smalls was convicted, kicked out of the United States Congress, and was convicted in court because a black guy falsely gave testimony against him. Denmark Vesey was hanged in Charleston trying to free slaves. Why? Because the black guy sitting there with him went and told what they were doing. So come on, let's get real and learn from that history. Why in the world would I and other members of the Congressional Black Caucus not be trying to do what's necessary to stop the killing of black people? We're doing it, and that's why we passed the bill. So talk to those guys in the Senate. There's a black guy who's a Republican in the Senate. His one vote on this would pass the law.
So, Congressman, as it pertains to gun control, you've been also very active because, 2019, the House passed the so-called Charleston loophole, but this gets stalled in the Republican-controlled Senate shortly after. But now that we have two chambers controlled by the Democrats and also President Joe Biden now in the White House, you have introduced a new proposal called the Enhanced Background Checks Act, which would extend the time frame that law enforcement has to complete a background check for a gun before it can be purchased, and that would take from 3 to 10 days. But if someone wants to, for instance, go through a fast track process, they can, under your proposal, go through this faster review through an FBI investigation. Senator Richard Blumenthal is also going to be introducing, or I think he introduced a companion bill in the Senate, and that this bill would be up for consideration next week. But I'm also asking if you could elaborate. Being that we have a very evenly split Senate, will this bill get the support it needs in order to actually become concrete gun reform? This is, again, almost 6 years after the Charleston massacre that took place in that church. This is also taking place, I think, 3 years after Marjorie Stoneman Douglas had experienced their tragic experience. Could you elaborate?
Well, look, once again, we're gonna pass this bill in the House. I'm the vote counter. That's what the whip does, count votes. And I'm gonna get the 218 votes that I need to pass this bill in the House. I don't expect it. There are two black Republicans in the House. I don't expect to get them to vote for this. Once again, what are you talking about, us Democrats? If it's just about us being black, what about those two black Republicans sitting over there on the Republican side? They did not vote for the bill, Justice in Policing. And when it gets to the Senate, Cory Booker gonna vote for this bill. And then go talk to the Republican senator over there. And by the way, Mike, you said the Democrats are in control. We are not in control of the Senate. We got 50 votes, Democratic votes. There are 50 Republican votes. We don't control the Senate. Let's stop saying that. It's a tie vote. The only reason that we get to organize and set the agenda is because under the Constitution, the vice president is in fact president of the Senate. And in that capacity can cast a vote in case of a tie. That's not controlling. The only way you can control the Senate under the rules is to have 50 or 60 votes, because it requires 60 votes to get beyond a filibuster. So if you got 41 Republicans, you can't have with 59 Democrats, and you cannot break a filibuster with 59. You got to have 60. And we changed the law to do that because of the, it used to be 60, you had to have 67 to break a filibuster. And we changed the law several years ago to drop it down to 60. What we need to do is get rid of this filibuster, because the filibuster was put in place for the express purpose of stopping progressive legislation from going forward, stopping progressive judges from getting on the bench. That is what we be subjected to right now. So that's what the fight is in the Democratic Party right now. And I'm on the side fighting. I've just told them that might be your rule, but I plan to be an exception to the rule, because I am not going to sit here and say I cannot get a federal judge unless that federal judge meets with the approval of Lindsey Graham. That's what's going on here. So let's just look at what's really going on, how this thing really works. And it's not as knee-jerk as people try to make it. There's a lot here that we have to be aware of, and we start raising these issues and stop buying into this tweet storm that goes on out there, whatever you do, tweeting this and Facebook and that. And we now know that Facebook is as responsible for what happened with Trump as anybody else, because a lot of people believe in that Facebook stuff. All that stuff out on Facebook, they were believing it. We now know it was all planted there by the Russians in order to keep black folks disturbed and turn them against people who are trying to do the work that needs to be done. I've seen most stuff on Facebook discrediting my work than I see anything else.
Well, Congressman Clyburn, this has been a privilege and an honor. I know you're a very busy man. I want to thank you for taking the time to be on the political mic today. And I know that you have some really important votes upcoming. So thank you for.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and conclude episode 33 of the Political Mic. Thank you all for tuning in.